dishes always stacked, trash everywhere. My friend would jump at any opportunity to stay at our house. What's something you witnessed as a child that you didn't realize was wrong until you grew up? When I was about 10, my dad offered to buy me candy and stopped at a store to run in. We had a long drive back and I asked where the candy was. He said in the bag in the back, but that he'd get it for me when we got home since he was driving. I said it's okay, I can reach it, and as I reached for it he slapped me and yelled that I can wait until I got home. My father had never hit me before that, and never did again after. The most confusing part to me was the look of utter sadness and shock on his face after he hit me. It wasn't until I was older that I understood he had bought a bottle of vodka and forgot to place it in its own bag. Or that I hadn't seen him drinking water all those times he disappeared to his truck and I snuck to the window to watch where he went. I remember my dad carrying my mom down the stairs when she overdosed on pills. A few years later, she rented a convertible Mustang and I wanted to check it out. My dad came out of the house screaming at me to get away from her. She left and the police showed up. I later learned that she was schizophrenic and would have inflicted a lot of harm onto me if I had gone too close. The reason she tried to end herself was to save me before she actually tried. Eventually, the disease won the battle and her brain turned to madness. My aunt called my mom one night saying she had locked her kids, 2 and 5, in the bathroom and asked my mom to come get them because she had a stomach bug and was headed to the hospital. I was probably only 6 years old at the time, so of course I believed it. I wasn't even supposed to hear the conversation to begin with, but I was a sneaky little shit. Turns out she was high as hell on pills and was having delusions of killing her kids and wanted to leave before she acted on it. She called her addict boyfriend to come pick her up and left my baby cousins locked in the bathroom at some random motel. Mom went and got the kids. Didn't see aunt for about 2 weeks. Showed up at our house sober, at least we think, took the kids home and didn't hear from her for a few months. Never got called about a situation again, but who knows what happened. She got clean about 4 or 5 years later, was diagnosed with BPD, refused any medical treatment or intensive therapy. Her husband at the time divorced her and got full custody of the kids. She is still dating said boyfriend who is on drugs, but she claims she isn't on them. I really don't think she is. She also has a job now and her own apartment and looks great, but still sad to see that she's still with him. They physically torment each other, and is living in her apartment somewhere in another state with him. None of her 6 kids talk to her and the 2 youngest are still in therapy to this day. All of her kids hate her and never fail to remind her when she attempts to reach out to them. Her 3rd youngest was diagnosed 2 years ago as a paranoid schizophrenic, so I'm not sure if that relates to her mental disorder as well. I still communicate with her here and there. She actually called me this morning to check on me and my son. I'm 32 weeks pregnant, but it's so hard to hold a conversation with her because she starts rambling about how amazing her boyfriend is and how nobody could ever take away her happiness and how her kids can kiss her ass basically. I love her dearly but hate the person she is and hope she fixes all of her mistakes before she or her kids die. My dad had a rare type of cancer that affected the bones in his face and jaw. When I was 5 years old, he had a tumor the size of a softball removed from one cheek. They removed his cheekbone, bottom jaw, nerves, lymph nodes, everything. The surgeon did a horrible job with a skin graft and spaced the stitches way too far apart. A couple weeks after his first operation, the wound got infected. I remember my mom and I were coming home after school one day and it was unusual to see that my dad was also home that early. He was getting out of his car as we were pulling up to the house, and the stitches on his face had started to rip open. The infected gunk and his skin started falling out of his face as he ran into the house. That was just one of the many horrible things that happened while my dad was sick. Being a kid and witnessing that level of gore so frequently desensitized me to it. I didn't realize how bad it was growing up in a household with a dying parent until I was much older. Holy moly, seeing his face rip open like that was not part of a normal childhood at all. When I was 5 or 6, I lived in a complex with 8 units. One day, my dad asked me to jump through one of the unit's bathroom windows, run through the house, and open the front door. I didn't really want to, as an old lady lived there that I didn't know well, and I thought I'd get in trouble if I was caught. Anyway, off I went, through the window and made my way to the front door. As I got to the lounge room, she was on a lounge chair, slumped with her eyes opened, looking straight at me. It scared the crap out of me. It was creepy, but more so, I remember thinking I had been caught breaking into her house. Anyway, I opened the front door and ran past my parents and neighbors, straight home. An ambulance came not long after, but I didn't really click what was going on. I later realized, in my teens, that she was dead. Apparently, she had been for a few days. Everyone in the complex was worried about her, so they used me to get into the house to check on her welfare. 30+ years later, I can still picture it. From 4th to 6th grade, I went to my friend's house regularly. For most of the friendship, his mom was super nice and engaged with us as kids, while his dad had always been this mysterious person at a high-powered job that everyone tiptoed around once he got home. My friend's attitude started changing near the end of our friendship. He started acting awful to his dog that he used to be obsessed with, and overall high-strung. His parents were a little off compared to before. I stayed for dinner one night like I had before many times, and his mom sat down with a black eye. I was confused, like, how did she get hurt? It was a bit awkward, but the dad was there and those meals were more about finishing up than chatting. I guess everything was always less fun when he was around. My friend was not the same as he was before. More aggressive, and that wasn't my style. Our friendship just kind of waned off. I didn't realize till many years later that his dad was likely a calculating asshole, was hurting his wife, and maybe his sons. I'll never forget the weird anxiety that filled the house in those last few months, and that my presence may have been a kind of reprieve period where the dad had to play it cool. That anxiety did end up pushing me away, and looking back I hope my friend, his brother, and mom got out of the situation. My mom used to let me watch cartoons late at night in her room as long as I didn't turn around or be too loud. I would always hear her flicking a lighter but didn't think too much about it. Years later I found out she was smoking meth right behind me and blowing it out the window. She would use me as an excuse as to why she was awake if my stepdad woke up and caught her. My uncle was withdrawing from drugs. He was always the fun, loud, crazy uncle. I was around 10 and my mom and I came home from somewhere, and when we pulled up he was sitting outside and said he needed a place to stay. My mom had to work the next day and he and I were both hanging out at the house, and I could tell he didn't feel well and was dry heaving. It was really scary. I asked him if I should call 911 and he said no, he'd be okay. I had no idea he had drug problems until I became an adult. He passed away not too long ago from liver failure. I went to a friend's house on the weekend to play video games when I was about 10. We had a good time and played a lot of games on the PS2. His mom came upstairs from the basement to ask if we wanted food. I turned around and said yes please, and before I could finish saying please I noticed she had a black eye. I asked my friend what happened to his mom's face and he said I can't say. 10-year-old me just said oh okay, and we proceeded to play video games. I didn't realize until I was about 19 what had happened. When I was 12, my dad quit drinking alcohol suddenly and without preparation, unaware that it wasn't the safest thing to do for a physically dependent alcoholic. I'll never forget him lying on the daybed in the TV room, asking me, "Why's Princess on the ceiling?" Princess was the neighbor's dog. My mom called an ambulance shortly after and got him taken to the hospital to be detoxed the right way. He was sober thereafter till the day he died. But in line with my family's motto of "you gotta laugh or you'll cry," the bit about Princess on the ceiling became a very dark family joke. Not referred to in front of my dad, because it hurt his feelings. It's only many years later in retrospect that I realize watching my dad hallucinating was probably pretty traumatic to me. I remember having a friend in high school whose parents were practically absent for most of his childhood. We used to make jokes about how jealous we were that he got to do basically whatever he wanted. He could sleep over at anyone's house any day of the week, and never had a curfew. We got close and I started coming over to his house, which was very dirty to say the least. All the food was microwavable or non-perishable junk foods. They had a turtle tank in the kitchen between the sink and the stove, dishes always stacked, trash everywhere, etc. My friend would jump at any opportunity to stay at our houses whenever our parents allowed, but I had to stop after a while because my friend didn't clean up after himself often. One day, my mom got upset after he left breadcrumbs all over our couch. She said, "He should know better." What would his parents think? Well, Mom, I don't think they'd think much. I proceeded to explain the conditions of his house. My mother was shocked and insisted he sleep over whenever he needed, but only if I made sure he learned to clean up after himself and was well fed. Somebody replied, "For some reason, this happens very often." I had several friends when I was growing up with similar mannerisms, didn't clean up, wore dirty clothes, smelled, and never wanted me to visit their houses. I always thought it was weird that everyone wanted to come to my house and hang out. Everyone would come over, and my mom would always have food for everyone. At some point when I was in high school I had to do a project with one of them. I visited the friend's house and quickly discovered their parents were nowhere to be found. Dirty, no food, parents gone for days. It was terrible and I always made a point to ensure they understood my house was open if they needed a place to stay or needed anything else. My parents, who co-owned a campground with my grandfather, took 3-year-old me and my 1-year-old brother on a road trip in the middle of the night. They called it an adventure. We never went back. I didn't know until I was an adult that my mom and grandfather had gotten in an argument the day before and her brilliant plan for revenge was to abandon a fully operational campground in the middle of the night without telling anyone. No one in the family knew where we were and my grandfather had to get my aunt's help to take over the business. How Mom got my dad to go along with this I don't know. We ended up living in a camper for 2 years like nomads, picking oranges with immigrants in Florida, working odd jobs until somehow my mom filed a lawsuit for their half of the campground investment and they bought some property with that money in the middle of nowhere. It was another year before we saw any of the family. They still talk about my mom doing this 45 years later. On a day out with my dad when I was little, I was playing in the park with a girl who was the same age as me. I didn't know her, but she was on her own. Me and my dad left after an hour or so, leaving the girl on her own again. Obviously, my dad asked where her parents were, etc. Later on that night, there was a big story on the news about a girl who had been abducted, and all my family kept asking me questions about this little girl. It went right over my head at the time, being only about 5 years old. 40 years later, I still think about her and wonder if she was the one on the news. My really odd babysitter got fired after she broke her glass table. I was playing with her son in another room when we heard a crash. She actually used to lock us in his room a lot. I don't recall much but I remember a big commotion soon after. I remember my dad screaming at my mom that night about how I was banned from going over there ever again and how it was my mother's fault for letting me go over there, which I didn't understand. Grew up to find out that babysitter was shooting up and fell through that glass table. Neighbors had heard the crash and rushed over and found her high as a kite with 2 kids locked in a room, me and her kid. When I was around 5 or 7 years old, I was out shopping with my mom when a man grabbed my hand and tried to walk out of the store with me. I didn't realize it wasn't my mom at first, but then I realized I didn't recognize him and pulled away. He looked down at me and said something like, "Come on Tommy, your mom's been looking everywhere for you," when suddenly my sister and mom came to the rescue. He apologized, said he thought I was his nephew, and immediately left. Looking back, he was definitely a kidnapper who was trying to take me to his van or something. I distinctly remember the entire store full of people stopping and staring, and later the person working there allowed me to have a toy for free. I think it was his way of making me feel better, though I had no idea what had happened at the time. When I was younger, I really never saw my two oldest brothers because they were always in and out of jail. One day, my mom tells me they will both be released on the same day and I'd get to see them when I got home from school, first grade. As I got home, I raced to the front door to see them finally, only to see my brother on top of the other one trying to stab him in the face with a kitchen knife on the couch. My body instantly froze and my mom shoved me out of the way to separate them. I never understood why my brothers would fight like that until I grew up, realizing my kitchen knife wielder brother was addicted to meth and would steal from us to get some drugs, so my brother had confronted him, ensuing the scuffle. I'm 25 now, my brother is still addicted to meth and in and out of jail, currently in. My other brother got his life together and has made a living for himself. It's not something oblivious, but as a child I didn't understand why this would happen. I still get nightmares or flashbacks about this fight till this day. When I was 5 or 6, my mom used to never want to get out of bed and just kept saying she was sick. Finally, my stepdad took her to a hospital, where she stayed for nearly a month. I thought it was so cool that her hospital let her do arts and crafts all the time, plus she got better and started doing arts and crafts with me too when she got home. I remember telling her that I wished I could go to the hospital and draw all day. She sat me down and told me that she hoped I would never get sick like she did, but if I do, there's nothing wrong with needing help to get better, even if you have to go somewhere for a little while to do it. It wasn't until I was probably 12 or 13 and didn't want to get out of bed myself that it clicked that the hospital she had gone to was a mental health hospital. But because of her, I've never felt shame about needing therapy when things are getting bad, or even just to maintain a healthy mindset. Somebody replied, "This one hit me hard. My depression got really bad my senior year of high school, and I felt the same way your mom did. Almost was hospitalized myself, but somehow avoided it. Your mom is a strong woman. Mental illness is no joke, and it absolutely kicks your ass sometimes. Kudos to her for getting the help she needed and encouraging you to do the same if you ever needed to." When I was probably around 4 to 6 years old, I used to walk my grandma up the stairs at her house every time we visited. She said she liked holding my hand. When I went to her room, she'd always compliment my shirts and be like, "What's this on your shirt here called?" And I'd say, "Oh, that's Winnie the Pooh," or whatever I was wearing. And she'd go on to tell me stories about the character or talk a bit about it. When I was 16, I learned she'd been blind for years. She'd ask me to hold her hand up the stairs so that I could help guide her to her room. She'd ask what was on my shirt because she could feel a pattern on it. I don't know why, but that kind of made me feel both sad and very loved. Like she couldn't see anymore, but she never wanted to let me worry about it and still managed to compliment what I was wearing all the time. She passed away while I was still very young, but those memories stuck like glue. Thanks for watching. I hope these stories made you reflect on your childhoods and those of the people around us.